I'd rather not name the city or the museum. Anyone who works late at night in an old building knows that names become rumors. My shift was 6 p.m. to 2 a.m., a security guard at a natural history museum in the U.S. After a leak and a mold outbreak, several galleries were sealed with thick plastic and machines hummed with dry air. During the month of decontamination, contractors and sanitation were still coming in. Afterward, the building felt too hollow. The system showed 8 or 9 armed zones and almost no events. Some nights I'd walk through the main hall without seeing a living soul. Our base was a small room in the basement, near the dock. An electric kettle, a microwave that made everything smell like stale popcorn, a snack machine that swallowed coins, 2 deep chairs, and a staff bathroom. I kept the radio at a minimum volume, just a hiss to remind us there was a world outside the concrete. The reception area on the ground floor had thick glass and a narrow drawer for swiping badges and clipboards. At night, almost no one rang the doorbell. When they did, it was a lost delivery person. One of those nights, I was checking seals when the dock's intercom vibrated. The sound was harsh, like a finger in a rubber glove. I answered. A deep voice asked unhurriedly, "Is there anyone on duty?" "Security. Who's speaking?" The breath on the other side made a long, "Ah." "Open the dock for a minute?" They left some of my equipment. I looked at the monitor, a plastic curtain flapping, a cart leaning against it, a damp sheen on the floor. No one. I asked the team, the work order. Instead of an answer, there were pops, and the same question, identical. "Is there anyone on duty?" I hung up, wrote in my notebook, 10:41 p.m., dock intercom unmarked, and went upstairs for extra patrol. The corridors were clean, emergency lights flashing, the Great Lakes Gallery covered in plastic film. In the diorama, a wolf and a deer stood motionless, glass eyes someone had patiently glued in years ago. The dehumidification machines breathed the building with a breath that wasn't mine. Back at base, I curiously swiped my ID at the time clock, and the printer spat out, "Departure 0203, my name." I glanced at the wall clock, 10:57 p.m. I tried again, same thing. The third time, same. It was as if the system had timed me the exact minute of my departure on any given night. I put away the strips and went upstairs to swap out the camera media. Midnight. The mosaic showed the dock, the hall, the stairs, the elevators, 2 galleries, and the taxidermy lab. I paused at the diorama monitor. For a second, I swear I saw the deer's head move slightly, like a millimeter adjustment. I rewound 10 seconds. On the way back, nothing. I whispered, "Not enough coffee," and continued on. At 1:20 a.m., the colleague from the next shift radioed, "I'll be there a few minutes early. Do you need anything?" "Everything's calm," I replied. "Just the point going crazy." The radio hissed. Before the answer, I heard the sentence that cut me off. It didn't come from the radio. It came from the direction of the counter, through the gap in the drawer, like a voice whispered down a long corridor. "Departure 203. I went to the reception desk. Beyond, only the reflection of the empty lobby. I placed the key on the edge of the drawer, heard the dull click of the metal. I returned to the basement. In the hallway, a fire door was wedged with a screw. I was sure I'd left it locked. I removed the screw, letting the door slam shut with a muffled puff and a dull clack. I like to make noises that I recognize when my mind threatens to invent others. I sat down and wrote down, 1:29 a.m., indistinct voice at counter, no one present. Check later. The intercom rang again. The same voice. "Is there anyone on duty?" I let the LED die on its own. When it went silent, I heard a slight scraping on the ceiling, like a chair scraping against concrete, but above there were only ducts. The panel flashed, Zone 2 movement, Pioneer's room sealed. I called on the radio. "Anyone in the second?" Silence. The display changed to service door, open. I grabbed my flashlight and went upstairs. The second-floor hallway smelled of chemicals. The Pioneer room was wrapped in plastic. Behind it, wax figures. A woman in an apron, a man with a saw, a girl pointing to a map painted with rivers. I shined the light on it, and the girl's hand seemed out of place, as if pointing to the glass, at me. I turned it off, then on. With continuous light, it became a trick of reflection. In the corner, the in-house TV was playing slides. One read, "Exit 0203. Record your exit correctly." I hadn't remembered that warning. I took a picture, mostly to prove later that I hadn't dreamed it. It was through a side glass door that I saw, by reflection, someone crossing the hallway. Uniform identical to mine. Careful step. It wasn't my colleague. He's taller. I leaned the radio against my shoulder. "Rick?" Hissing. I peeked around the corner. Elevators on the ground floor. No one. I went downstairs, deciding to wait out the shift at the counter with all the lights on. I emailed myself a photo of the timesheets and the TV. At 1:58 a.m., the entrance hall lit up on the monitor. Wide angle, a patch of sidewalk and the shadow of someone passing by. A hood, a glow on the chest that could have been a badge. The sensor lit up, the doorknob didn't move, the intercom went silent. The hall returned to a still aquarium. At 2 a.m. sharp, Rick entered through the locked service door. The conversation was short. I handed over the report, holding back the part that would make me look crazy. I swiped my badge at the time clock. The display read 0203 as if fulfilling a promise. I put on my coat and left. Outside, it was dry and cold. The parking lot was empty. 2 trees with stiff branches, a damp sheen on the asphalt. On the avenue, no cars. My steps became a metronome. I turned the corner onto the street of row houses. A kitchen ahead had a light on, glasses on the table. I noticed because my brain needs mundane targets when everything threatens. I heard the second pair of footsteps through the barbershop window, which brought me back whole. The sound behind me came from the tiptoe, light, controlled. I stopped. He stopped. I looked back. Newspaper on a flower bed, a crushed can. Nothing. I walked faster. The air smelled like the second floor. Chemicals and cold. In the window of a shipping agency, I saw what I didn't want to see. About 10 feet behind someone wearing my uniform, my hood, my flashlight clipped to my belt. In the reflection, the face was a pale, featureless blur. I turned, ready to face him. The sidewalk was empty. "Have you clocked in yet?" my voice asked from behind. I ran, without a plan. The block stretched elastically. The other one ran along, copying my pace, like a shadow stuck to it. When the cold hand grabbed my wrist, I thought of my badge. I tucked it into my coat. The hand went up to my neck, the impersonal pressure of someone adjusting a collar. "It's my turn," my voice said. "Exit 0203. No screams came out. I thought of the TV slide, the printer strips, the deer that might have moved, the intercom asking for people. The world responded with a sound that tore through the air. A bus brake. A night bus pulled up at the stop ahead. The doors opened with a hydraulic sigh. The driver inclined his head. "Everything okay there?" The pressure disappeared like a hand pulled from water. I staggered. The driver took 2 steps down. The bus light spilled yellow onto my shoes. "Do you want to go up?" "I'm close," I managed to say. He waited until I crossed the street and reached the house with the light on. I didn't ring the bell. I leaned against the streetlight, counted to 20, watched the bus leave, and continued on through larger streets, my badge hidden and my hands buried in my coat. The next day, I took the 0203 tapes to the supervisor. He said the clock sometimes prints test shots. I asked to see the cameras between 1:50 and 2:10. On the large monitor, I watched myself put away my notebook, adjust my flashlight, and leave. And the second I walked through the door, every animal in the ground floor diorama, wolf, deer, birds, tilted its head a millimeter in the same direction. The exit. It felt like wind, but glass doesn't catch wind. "Motion reflex," he said, searching closer for the explanation. "Sensor." The zones were armed. I showed the report. At 2:03 a.m., the system registered my badge at a door I don't use, the access to the taxidermy lab's internal staircase. In the recording, I was on the other side of the building. He pursed his lips, said "strange," and wanted to end it. I didn't file an external report. I didn't point out anyone in a lineup of suspects. I had no face to recognize. I had a copy of my routine. I requested a change to the afternoon shift. Within a few weeks, I got it. I never stayed alone after midnight again. Months later, returning by bus, I passed the museum and glanced at it. Behind the glass reception desk, a shadow stood still, hands resting on the drawer as if waiting for a badge. On the second floor, the TV was spinning announcements. Among them I recognized, like someone hearing their own name in a crowded room, the number that gripped my stomach. 2, 3. If there's a lesson, I don't know. I just suspect that some places don't tolerate the gap between those leaving and those entering. They fill it. And when they need to cover this shift, they grab whatever they have at hand, our voice, our step, our uniform, and keep to the clock with more zeal than we do. Working at St. Brendan's Laundry in Boston meant knowing the sounds the city doesn't hear, the whirring of centrifuges, the low-pitched squeal of ironing belts, the wet crackle of ducts as someone upstairs tossed a sheet down the downspout. I took the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift because it paid a decent amount and because in the basement, there were no patients, no crying relatives, no one asking for anything I couldn't deliver. Just volume, rhythm, and heat. That night, the digital clock above the time clock seemed stuck between 2 minutes. The thermometer read 18 degrees. Even so, my face was constantly sweaty from the steam the heater released into the pipes. I mopped the floor while the last batch of laundry on the second floor ran its rinse cycle. I cleaned the machine displays, counted pillowcases, checked the labels in the pediatric ward. Small things. The best part of the early morning is the certainty that everything happens far away. The radio clipped to my belt crackled around 2:40 a.m. Service crew, please check ironer 1, slight misalignment. This was common. Sometimes a sheet would hang crooked. I adjusted the roller, took a deep breath of the smell of bleach and detergent, and resumed folding. The silence soon returned, a silence woven by engines. I liked it because it had a temperature. Every now and then, the boiler pump would make a coughing noise, and I knew it was time to check the level. At 2:58 a.m., I heard the elevator in corridor E2 ascend without being called. The cabin made that bicycle brake sound as the doors opened. I looked out the living room window. Nothing in the hallway, just the fluorescent light vibrating. Maybe someone had pressed the button and given up. I returned to work. At 3:03 a.m., the same sound. This time the door slammed twice before stabilizing, as if it had struggled to respond. I walked over, pushing an empty cart. The E2's interior light was on, and in front, pressed against the doorframe, was another cart of clothes. Full. No conveyor belt, no clipboard with a checklist. Just the cold, shiny metal and the smell of freshly dried fabric. I approached, pushing my cart so the wheels wouldn't scrape the floor. I didn't notice at first. It was when I straightened the top pile, out of habit, that I saw it. The larger, overlapping sheets formed straight, white, heavy letters like signs. Nogueira. My last name. The air grew short, as if the machines were sucking more oxygen than usual. I'm not one to see a signal in everything. My mind went to the practical. A prank. Someone from the floor joking with the new girl from the night shift. But no one from the floor came to the basement at that hour without calling on the radio. And no one, for fun, would bring a cart down unaccompanied. Hospital policy. Then came another sound from a room not there. 3 beeps, one next to the other, beating together like soft claps. I knew the pattern of the heart monitors from the code announcements that sometimes came through my radio. This wasn't an alarm. It was a rhythm. 3 short synchronized beats cutting through the silence coming from the hallway intercom, as if the sound had leaked from a strange floor. My finger reflexively found the intercom button. Services basement, I said. Silence. Just the machines and that trio of beeps from a place I couldn't quite pinpoint. I pressed again, asking for security. Security section, Rodriguez listening. I breathed through my nose, weighing my words so as not to sound hysterical. I explained the elevator descending on its own, the unescorted cart, my name written in sheets. Stay where you are, I'll be right down, he said. The digital clock flashed 3:04, 3:05, and 3:03 again, as if the number was stubborn. I took a step back from the cart, trying to laugh nervously. I toyed with the possibility that someone had read my badge as I walked past with the baskets that night and was playing a trick on me. Opening the cart would be admitting to the game. Still, I opened it. The heat coming out wasn't normal, not from a dryer, a dense body heat. Beneath the sheet with the letter R was an ivory badge with a worn edge. The photo was old. The name, Eileen M. Moran. Position, laundry. Date of issue, 2019. The badge wasn't the new standard. I'd never seen that woman before. And the plastic was warm as if it had just been in someone's pocket. A fine tremor ran up my arm. I wanted to let go, but I held the badge between my thumb and forefinger like holding a living thing. At that moment, the 3 beeps happened again and then again, perfectly aligned without a break. The radio on my belt hissed loudly as if someone had run their hand over the antenna. Basement? Rodriguez's voice drifted down the hallway, accompanied by the squeak of rubber soles. He turned the corner, his flashlight pointed downward, more to calm me than to see. "Who brought the cart down?" he asked before approaching. I shook my head. He craned his neck over the edge and read, without comment, my last name written there. I handed over my badge like someone passing an exam. Rodriguez turned the plastic over in his hands. "Moran," he said. "It's been a while. Do they still use that badge?" I asked. "Because any question will do when the world doesn't want to make sense." "She died before I got to the hospital," he replied dryly. "There was a flood in the early morning. The elevator got stuck between the ground floor and the first floor, that's what they said. No one talks much." He put his badge in his pocket, looking at his own gesture, as if he needed to see his hand obey. "What about those beeps?" I asked, feeling the skin on my back crawl beneath my uniform. He lifted his chin, as if hearing them for the first time. We both turned to the intercom. The source sounded disjointed, as if coming from 2 walls at once. "Room 317, he ventured, out of the habit of someone who memorizes maps. "But 317 has been closed for renovation since January." It happened again. 3 perfect, aligned beats, like a triple heartbeat. Rodriguez clicked on the radio and called the dispatcher. "Can you confirm the status of 317? The voice from the radio above came with an echoing delay. "Closed. No equipment. The key is with the caretaker." Elevator E2 responded with a sigh, the doors retracting a centimeter on their own and opening again as if breathing. "Let's check the cameras," Rodriguez said, more to himself than to me. I followed him to the maintenance room, 2 doors to the left of the ironer. An old monitor monitored the E2 corridor. We rewound. At 2:56, the corridor was empty. At 2:58, the E2 doors opened with no one in sight. The cart was gone. At 3:00, no shadows, the floor covered in a film of cotton dust as always. At 3:02, a blur, perhaps a reflection, perhaps a compression of the image. At 3:03, the cart was there, fully formed, leaning against the doorframe. Nothing else, no one, no pushing. The cart appeared as if someone had pasted a frame onto the video. Rodriguez zoomed in roughly with the mouse wheel. The white letters became grainy, even magnified to bursting. The edges of the sheets remained strangely defined, as if they'd been drawn with a ruler. He let out a that meant, "I don't want to deal with this." Then he tapped the flashlight lightly on the tabletop like a judge closing the session. "I'll call the engineer and write a report. Let's empty this and label it. Don't be alone with the elevator." The sentence hung in the hallway too large, but I didn't want to stay outside with E2 breathing. I went back, put on new gloves, pulled out the sheet with the letter N, then the O, and so on, folding as if folding were a way to organize the mind. Each piece arrived hot, without the dryer running for the last 10 minutes. At the bottom of the cart, under everything, a wet pillowcase. Not with water. It left a colorless halo on the metal, a head mark. I stuffed the pillowcase into an evidence bag as if this were a crime. And maybe it was, just of a different nature. When we finished, Rodriguez noticed something I hadn't. In the fine dust that always remains in the corner of the hallway, there wasn't the slightest wheel mark, not even a sole. The cart should have scratched it. The E2 doors should have accumulated a line of dirt on the floor. There was nothing. The cart had arrived without touching the ground, at no cost to the article. And yet, the badge he now held was still warm in his hand. Maintenance came with a clipboard, opened the E2 panel, and muttered about sensors. No calls between 2:30 and 3:10, the engineer said, frowning. But it registered the door opening at 3:03. He looked at me as if I could explain. Did anyone touch it? I shrugged, no longer willing to prove anything. The 3 knocks sounded again over the intercom, low, insistent, and the engineer closed the panel with a snap that sounded like fear. I'm locking the elevator until tomorrow. The rest of the shift passed slowly, me folding and refolding, driving away the heat from the memory of the cart and the badge. At 6, when the day shift began arriving, I told the story in small words, so it would fit in my mouth without spilling over. Some laughed, others crossed themselves because Boston has those. I returned the keys and left through the service door, the sky already lightening between the brick buildings. At the end of the week, security called me in to sign a formal report. The paper coldly summarized the night. Elevator E2 opens without a call, laundry cart located without an escort, intercom audio anomaly, former employee Eileen Moran's badge found inside. No one explained anything further. There was no why on the form. Later, I heard through the hallway that the badge was returned to the family and that the janitor had finally dusted off 317. They said the bleach smell was old inside, and that even with the windows sealed, the curtains moved as if they were shaking with a dryer. Gossip? Maybe. What's proof when the thing passes through the video without touching the floor? Me? I asked to leave the night shift. I still work at the laundromat because bills aren't paid with shock. But if I stay late to cover for someone and it hits 3:03, I turn off the radio, triple-check the lock on the room, and climb the fire escape, bypassing E2. At home, sometimes I wake in the middle of the night with a dull rhythm in my head. 3 beeps, aligned, weaving through the air like a nearly invisible thread. I stay still, listening throughout the apartment, searching for the sound. It doesn't come. What comes is something else. The snap of folded fabric, the letters forming my name on metal shining like water. That's when I remember the warmth of my badge in my palm and understand some things choose who folds, not who writes. And in the basement of St. Brendan's, some things continue their shift even when you clock out. Not me. I've learned. I don't work nights anymore. I take the 11 p.m. shift at a municipal aquarium in a coastal city. It's the kind of job that pays the bills without asking questions, checking salinity levels, listening to the recirculation pumps, noting any leaks in the life support department's blue notebook. The building sleeps differently than the city. It looks like a plane parked in the dark, the ceiling sighing, the tanks like windows to where time moves sideways. I accepted because morning classes don't work with a day job and because I need to save money to move out of the house my mother shares with her new husband. At 2 a.m., there's only me, a cleaning lady who disappears before midnight, and the receptionist, a retiree who reads fishing magazines with a flashlight. I like the main tank, where 2 rescued turtles do lazy laps and 3 black-tip sharks act like metronomes. There's a long bench behind the plexiglass in the maintenance hallway. Sometimes I sit there with my clipboard and try to guess the fish's routes by the reflection of the emergency lights. That night, the hum of the pumps sounded deeper, as if the building had caught a cold. The air was thick, and the skimmer foam was rising higher than usual. I wrote it down in my notebook and went to check the filters. That's when I heard it. 3 short taps on the acrylic, like a fingernail on glass. Tap, tap, tap. Nothing extraordinary. Tourists tap all day long even though signs tell them otherwise. But there were no tourists, and the sound came from inside. I looked and saw a woman in the main tank almost pressed against the glass, so close I could count the strands of her dark hair rippling in the water. She wasn't one of our divers. The maintenance crew wears full-face masks, thick gloves, and a waterproof clipboard. She was dressed simply. A loose gray t-shirt and black pants, the fabric too light for a saltwater tank. Her skin looked normal, which also didn't make sense. Underwater people turn blue, blotchy with bubbles. Not her. She saw me, knocked again, and pointed to the left, toward the emergency exit from the loading dock. The one that leads to the dock where the rescued fish arrive. I froze for a second. My mind churned through options that didn't fit. Reflection, projection, invasion. The belt-mounted radio hissed. CRNA? It sounded like the guard's voice piercing through the static. I pressed the button. Can you hear me? The hissing responded with a long whistle, and then 2 words clean without a sound. Come, now. The woman in the tank raised her arm and repeated the gesture, an insistent pointing motion, like someone giving instructions to someone late. The red light on the exit sign flashed once. Habit overcame fear. If someone is where they shouldn't be, inside a tank at 2 in the morning, you check, because your signature goes on the incident report. I walked through the narrow corridor behind the acrylic, its grated metal floor smelling of iodine and salt. As I walked, she followed me on the other side, gliding with the water, always parallel to me, like a thick shadow. The turtles moved away. The gills disappeared into the depths. As I passed the observation window of another tank, I saw something strange. The water surface didn't tremble. The main tank always bubbles because of the pumps. That night, it looked like real glass. I remembered the protocol. If the flow appears stagnant, check valves, and felt ridiculous. The emergency exit door to the cargo aisle has a horizontal bar. Above it, a sign says opening it sets off an alarm and calls the police. But that's for the public. In the aisle, the lock is with a badge. I stopped there, feeling the cold breeze that always seeps through the cracks. The woman on the other side of the acrylic knocked harder. Tap, 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 then placed her open palm on the glass right at my face. I moved closer without meaning to. There was something familiar about the hand. The length of the fingers, the tiny scar on the index finger, the light spot near the thumb, just like mine, from a burn on the grill at my aunt's food truck when I was 15. No. I spoke softly just to myself. The woman smiled slightly, and it was my smile. A slit of a mouth I recognize in the mirror when I leave exhausted, trying to look like everything's okay. The radio crackled again. Are you alone in there? The voice came out round like a recording. I was about to answer when the sound changed. It became my mother's voice calling my first name, said in that specific way I used to say when I hid to avoid washing dishes. Open the door. My hand touched my badge without being told to. The door bar waited, passive. On the other side of the wall, the loading dock, dark, without cameras, smelling of water and diesel. The woman, me, knocked once more and inclined her head, asking, not demanding. I hate to admit it, but a part of me felt tugged, not by force, but by politeness, as if someone very dear had said, "Trust me." It was the noise that woke me, not from the bombs, but from something dripping behind me. I turned. The corridor left a trail of drops on the metal like the ones we make when we get out of a wetsuit. There was no one there. I touched the ground. The drops were cold, salty. I followed the trail with my eyes. It began at the turn toward the main tank and went forward to where I was. It stopped exactly where my sneakers used to be. "You're always so obedient," said the voice on the radio, with the intonation of someone who's known me for years. Radio doesn't talk like that. Radio doesn't use adjectives. I pulled my badge away from the reader. The lock light remained green for a second too long, as if insistent. "Door alarm 3A armed," the system said over the loudspeaker, a phrase I'd never heard before at 2 in the morning. 3A is the outside door, on the dock. To be armed, someone must have passed through it. I took 2 steps back. The woman inside the tank rested her forehead against the glass. The contours of her face thawed, lost focus, as if the water had finally remembered to move. The trick is over, I thought. Or maybe I've just woken up. I ran to the control room. The CCTV screens showed corners only I knew from having been through so many times. On the reception camera, the guard slept with the magazine over his face. On the main tank camera, nothing but fish and blue lighting. I backpedal, then advance, then pause. Just when I swear I saw the woman, the image polarized as if someone had passed a wet hand over the lens. Noise, glare, a reflection that could have been anyone, could have been me. On the 3A feed, the system registered. Access granted. Card, employee 017-0237. My badge. And yet there I was, in the room, with it hanging around my neck. I wanted to laugh, the way we laugh when our bodies want to cry but don't have the courage. I took off my badge, dried myself with my shirt, cleaned the camera lens, anything to keep myself occupied. That's when I heard footsteps outside, running down the pier corridor. Few people know that corridor exists. I picked up the radio. Reception? Silence. There's someone in 3A. Silence. A voice that wasn't the guards answered. I'm already here. The bar outside moved. It shouldn't have. 3A opens onto the pier. There's no inside handle. I heard the latch vibrate, heard a heavy splash like someone shaking out wet clothes. The pumps lowered a notch. The building took a deep breath. I didn't think, just as we don't think when oil catches fire on the stove. I left the control room and ran to the front of the building, ignoring the maintenance corridor and the short path that would take me back to the door. I passed the seahorse tank, the tunnel of small sharks, the shop with fluorescent toys. I reached the reception and shook the guard's shoulder. He woke with a start, his hand on his chest. There are people on the pier, I said. Someone with my badge. He blinked slowly, stood up with a cracking knee, and walked with me to the control room. Did you open it? He asked. I shook my head and pointed to the monitor. He leaned in, brought his face closer to the screen, clicked rewind, paused, and advanced frame by frame. There, in the little gray square of 3A, someone walked through the door at the exact second of the recording. The edge of the frame caught only a shoulder and a drenched strand of hair. No facial expressions. Could be a misreading, he ventured, with the confidence of someone who's seen it all and doesn't want to see anymore. We spent the rest of the night doing what the manual says, sweeping, checking locks, counting the staff, which was me and him. The sound of the pumps normalized as if the building had had tea. At 5:30, the morning crew began arriving, and light filtered through the polycarbonate ceiling of the lobby. There was a trail on the exhibition floor, leading from the main tank to the parking lot exit, footprints as if someone had walked barefoot, each footprint imprinted by the water that wouldn't dry. I followed them with a cloth, reflexively. I stopped on the fourth step. Their feet were small, almost my size, with the second toe on their left foot slightly longer than the big toe, just like mine. Door alarm 3A disarmed at 05:07. The system chirped excitedly. The guard and I exchanged glances. He walked to the dock door with a set of keys that jingled like a cat's necklace. Want to see something curious? He said, opening it. The sea breeze blew in, bringing the sound of seagulls. On the ground, just inches from the doorframe, lay my badge, soaked. The lanyard looked like it had been cut and then welded together with salt. I picked it up with 2 fingers, my name distorted by the water. The manager arrived with the look on his face that he'd hate to deal with the police so early in the morning. They called the city, who called the department, who called an access systems technician. He spent hours reviewing logs and concluded there was no failure. My card opened 3A at 2:37 a.m. Someone passed. The camera lost focus for 11 frames. The main tank flow readings dropped 4% in the same minute. Must have been overnight maintenance, the manager said, but no one from maintenance had clocked in. The guards asked me to tell them everything. I told them just as I'm writing now, with the ridiculous part of, a woman called me from inside the tank, and the worst part of, her hand had my scar. They wrote probable intruder on the form and handed me back my badge, dry and stuck with salt, a little warped. If it happens again, call 911 directly, they said. I meant it hadn't happened like that before. I kept quiet. The next night, I pocketed the radio and a pair of pliers. I made my rounds twice as fast and ignored the bench behind the main tank. Even so, somewhere between 2 and 3, the pumps took on that deep, cold tone, and I heard the 3 taps, tap, 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 coming from inside. I didn't look. I went to the control room and stared at the monitor like someone staring at a wall in punishment. The feed shook, the image flared, and for a second I swear I saw, a face press against the acrylic, the outline of a mouth forming my name. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, the camera showed only fish and water. I changed shifts 2 weeks later. They said it was because of classes, which isn't a lie, but it's not. Sometimes during the day, when I pass the aquarium to get my mail, the exit sign for 3A blinks once as if remembering. On my left sneaker, the scar from my index finger is repeated in leather. A small, crescent-shaped scratch I don't remember making. And there's the dream, which came back 2 nights in a row and then disappeared. Me on the pier, my back to the water, hearing someone wet dripping from the door and calling me with the voice I use when I need to be believed. In the dream, I turn my face, and it's not a woman. It's just the standing water with my clothes, my weight, my haste. A girl from the education department asked me the other day if it's true that turtles recognize their caregivers. I said yes, they do. And that sometimes we also recognize things we don't have the courage to name. When I get home and wash my hands, I still smell the salt that won't wash away. And every now and then, when I look in the mirror, my smile gives me a come I don't remember giving.